Have you ever wanted to paint something impressive but didn't think you were good enough or had the painting skills needed? If so, stay tuned. I think you're going to love this project. I'm Chris Haughey and welcome to my studio. I'm going to share tips, tricks, and techniques that are mind-blowingly simple. The results are amazing, impressive, and breathtaking. This project has 4 main pieces and a stencil. This is a double arch plaque, and I'm using Decor Americana acrylic paint. I'm putting the paint on with nice, long, even strokes, starting from the center, painting toward the outer edges. Just helps keep those outer edges clean. Once I dry it, I'm going to give it a little bit of a sand around the outer edges. This is optional, but I like that look of a little bit of vintage aging and distressing. Wipe it clean. I've picked up a baby wipe and I am using bittersweet chocolate. Wrap the baby wipe around the tip of my finger, dipping it into the chocolate paint and using a small circular motion, just going around the edges. And you can see where it's sanded. It's just grabbing that paint a little bit heavier. And it's very easy to control the amount of paint that's being applied. Just gives that soft vintage look around the outer edge. And now I'm just buffing it with the baby wipe to give it more of an even coverage. Position the stencil and secure it with a piece of painter's tape. I want to make sure it doesn't scoot around while I'm stenciling. That just will ensure those crisp, clean edges. I've loaded my brush with the bittersweet chocolate, and I'm using my painter's pal. It's just a little template that I created. It's wonderful to use, has a lot of variety with it, but I'm using that to mask off any areas that I don't want to get the paint in. I am a messy stenciler, so this just helps ensure that I'm not going to get paint where I don't want it. I loaded my brush well, and then I wipe it on a paper towel to remove the excess paint off of the tips of the brush. That keeps the paint from being applied too heavily. One of the reasons that imperfect stenciling looks messy is because it's too much paint and it runs underneath the stencil. It is always, always, always best to do 2 light coats as opposed to 1 heavy coat, and you can see what a difference that makes. Once I've applied the bittersweet, I'm using Santa Red and painting those little decorative swirls. And look how beautiful that is. And I did do 2 coats on the red as well. Now I've loaded my 18-aught script liner. The stencil has these little bridges that keep the letters together. A lot of times I'll leave those, but if I want a more painted effect, I'll just take my brush and just connect those bridges so that it looks like it flows more fluently, and it does look more hand painted. So it's a simple, quick way to add that more professional effect. This is raw sienna, and I've thinned it down until it's almost ink-like, which means very transparent. And I'm creating a drop shadow, so I'm pulling the paint down. It's a number 5 radical round, just pulling it down the right side and across the bottom section of every letter. Oh my goodness, if you want to add a wow factor, something really impressive to lettering, this is the key. It's so simple. The trick is to keep that paint very fluid, add enough moisture on your brush that it's going to flow very easily, very quickly. And look how those letters just look like they're lifted off of the background. This is one of those wow factors that's very subtle, yet again, very, very impressive. And I decided to jazz up the letters a little bit. I'm using my stylus to dip dot. You can use the tip of a pencil, the end of a small brush, but look how those letters just come to life and are very, very playful. Now for the smaller letters, I just bumped down to a smaller tip on my stencil. If you're using a pencil, just sharpen it and you'll get that smaller point on it. Make sure that it dries really well. Everything I'm using is listed in the links below. If you have any questions, let me know. This is such a fun project. This is the candy cane, and I'm base coating it with bleach sand and the marshmallows on the mug. I just took the chalk pencil and made the top of the mug where the line is, and then painted the marshmallows, the bleach sand. The mug itself is Santa red. Everything has 2 coats on it. So one coat, nice, even, and smooth from the inside toward the outer edges. Let it dry, and then apply the second coat, and it just looks perfect. I'm using my flat to create the stripes on the candy cane, and I just eyeball it. This is a fun project. It's not perfect, but that's what makes it fun and easy and impressive. It's just very playful. Bump down to a smaller, this is my 18-aught Epic script liner, adding the Santa red double stripes in between each of the wider stripes. I did not finish the bottom of the candy cane because it will be behind the cup. Now I've loaded the toe of my 1/4 inch angle with thinned raw sienna, and I'm just floating on or shading, outlining, if you may, the marshmallow, the tops, and the sides. Again, this does not have to be perfect, just very simple. And you can see that it doesn't take much time to float this on or add these raw sienna, and they look really dark. But stick with me because we are going to add a little bit of a wow factor to those. Adding a little bit of the bittersweet chocolate around the outer edge of the mug. This is optional, but it does add more dimension. I've loaded my number 5 round with that bittersweet chocolate, and I'm just dripping some chocolate syrup down from the lip of the mug and just letting my brush create those drips. Not fussy, just have fun with this. Lightly sanding around the outer edge of the candy cane. This is going to help connect the plaque and all the pieces, that same vintage effect. And you can go really heavy on this or keep it very light. I did not want this to be too vintage, so I just lightly sanded it, going around the outer edge with that bittersweet chocolate and giving it a little bit of dimension. A lot of water and float that around. To paint the snowflake, I use a cosmetic sponge, dip it in the bleach sand, and very lightly, gently tap it. That will keep those side edges clean, keep that paint on the surface of the snowflake, and it's absolutely perfect. This is the wow factor, getting a little bit of the snow white and pulling it down the center of that snowflake or the candy cane. Using Snow White to highlight the top and the sides of the marshmallows. This is going to make them white and bring in that brightness and that little bit of dimension that will create that look of this marshmallows. Loaded the toe of my 1/4 inch angle with Snow White, and I'm pulling down a little bit of the highlight on the left side of the drips. Just let that brush float it on, really makes those drips stand out and pop. Now I'm getting my Epic script liner and adding stronger highlights because that white, when it dries, is going to be very subtle. It will tone down tremendously, and this will just help them stand out. And really, look at that. It's just almost magical. Doing the same thing with the marshmallows. I want those to be bright and white, and everybody knows that those are marshmallows. I use my stylus to add some random bleach sand dip dots around the snowflake on the mug. You can also use the handle end of a brush, just as a little more playfulness. I wanted to add some design in the background, and you can either use the snowflakes that are on the stencil, but this is a starburst and it's one of my sparkle pals. I just thought it would be fun to do something a little bit different. I'm stenciling it with the bittersweet chocolate. And if you're looking for a good stencil brush, this is my spectacular stencil brush. The bristles are super soft and it provides just perfect stenciling. Look, I just think those little starbursts are really pretty. I position the mug so that I know where it's going to be placed. And that way I can put the little starburst around that and I can get them just exactly where I want it. And just keep adding the little snowflakes or starbursts until you're happy with um, filling up the background. I wanted to add just a little more texture in the background. I slide the bottom of my palette knife over a thin puddle of that bittersweet chocolate and then just scoot it across the surface of the plaque. Too much paint is going to be blobby, so just keep that paint very minimal. Splattered it a little bit with Snow White, just helps to brighten it up. I'll let it dry and then I'll repeat the splattering with a little bit of that bittersweet chocolate. After I get everything in place, I will glue it with a combination of hot glue and tacky glue. I'm using my mini Bodabra to create a bow. I like to layer in not only color and texture, but size. I started out with a couple pieces of burlap and I'm adding some red ribbon. This is probably about a ½ inch thick. Add a couple layers of the red. This is such a strong Christmas color. I couldn't find checkerboard that was the right size, so this was a 1-inch wired ribbon, so I just cut it down the center. And so one side has a wire on it and one side is cut, but it worked out really well. So look at what you have. A lot of times you don't have to have anything particular just to create the bow. And if you get a little more creative, sometimes that turns out a little more fun. This is hemp, or you could use the 2-ply jute. This is a little bit of a smaller bow, so I did trim them kind of short. I didn't want it to cover up my chocolate and my marshmallows. I decided to put a jingle bell in the center, and this is a rusty tin jingle bell. Once I put it on there, it just seemed kind of dark, so I dipped my finger in a little bit of bleach sand and just lightly put a bit of paint on the jingle bell. It looks a little bit distressed, which worked out perfectly. All right, so I wanted to add a little bit of sparkle on the snowflake. I glued it on, but after I glued it on, I should have done this before I glued it on, but I'm using my finger to just tap I'm using ultra matte varnish and sprinkle it with the diamond dust. This is a chunkier glitter. I love the way it looked. And you can use a brush if you don't want to use your finger. I just think my finger, I always have it close by and it's easy to use. So I just spread the varnish on with my finger, sprinkled it with the diamond dust, and it turned out so pretty. I did not coat the marshmallows heavily. I just added a few strokes of varnish and added that little bit of sparkle. Hot glued the bow on the mug. And then I decided it would be really pretty to add a few bits of greenery. And I'm just tucking them in and around. I don't want it to cover my mug up, so I'm cutting them rather short. I think that little bit of green really brings that Christmas flavor in. Add some color. I did tuck a few little berries in and around the greenery. After I had everything glued in place, I took my brush and a little bit of that ultra matte varnish and touched on the berries, a little bit on the ribbons, some on the greenery, and then I will sprinkle it with the diamond dust. Don't overdo this. A little bit makes a big difference. And I'll just sprinkle it heavily onto the area and then let it dry, tap it off, and then funnel the excess back into the jar. That way you won't waste any. But look how that little bit of sparkle really adds that Christmas dazzle and that Christmas magic. Everything I used is listed in the description below. I love how this turned out. It almost feels nostalgic. Thank you for joining me, and I hope my tips give you confidence to paint like a pro and add some vintage holiday magic to your Christmas. Be sure to like, subscribe, and share. That way you won't miss out on upcoming videos. I look forward to our next painting adventure together, and remember, a little bit of paint makes a big difference.